Archaeologists make numerous amazing discoveries every year, but sometimes they encounter things that send shivers down their spine. Here is a collection of the creepiest archaeological finds for your viewing pleasure. In 79 AD, a terrible tragedy occurred that still horrifies people today. The wealthy ancient Roman city of Pompei was completely buried under a layer of ash after the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Several thousand people died as a result of this disaster. For over 1,500 years, the city remained hidden from view under a thick layer of volcanic rock, and it was only accidentally discovered in 1592 during the digging of a channel from the Sarno River. The first excavations in Pompeii began in 1748. Over time, a large number of remains of the city's residents were discovered, some of which are located in the National Archaeological Museum of Naples. However, these are not exactly human remains. More precisely, they are plaster casts that accurately convey the bodies and facial features of the deceased. When Pompeii was buried under a thick layer of ash, the bodies of the city's inhabitants were covered by dense volcanic rock, which eventually hardened. Inside the volcanic cocoon, the bodies also underwent a natural process of decomposition. Over time, voids formed within the volcanic layer, which precisely captured the shape of the bodies of the deceased. In 1864, Italian archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli devised a method to study the bodies of Pompeii given this unique burial feature. He suggested making a small hole and pouring in a plaster mixture. This technique, known as the plaster casting technique, continues to be used to this day. Cases of leprosy, also known as Hansen's disease, are mentioned in the Old Testament of the Bible, where the disease was considered divine punishment for sins. However, it turns out that people suffered from leprosy long before the sacred Christian book was written. In 2009, archaeologists from Appalachian State University were conducting excavations at the ancient settlement of Balathal in Rajasthan, India. During their research, they discovered ancient human remains. After examination, scientists determined that the remains belonged to a man who died about 4,000 years ago at the age of 37. His death likely resulted from disease, as indicated by the complete absence of teeth, atrophy of the nasal spine, and a sunken jaw. According to experts, these signs indicated that the man had suffered from leprosy. This discovery was sensational, as archaeologists had not previously found leprosy-infected remains with such an ancient date. Therefore, the skeleton found in Rajasthan is officially recognized as the oldest known person to have suffered from leprosy. Today, people continue to contract leprosy. According to statistics, about 250,000 people are diagnosed with leprosy annually, but modern medical methods allow for complete recovery from the disease. In 2011, during excavations on the island of South Uist in Scotland, archaeologists discovered a burial site with 4 mummies dated to the 1st millennium BC. 2 mummies belonging to a girl aged 12, 14, and a boy aged 3, 4, did not raise any questions. However, the other 2 bodies shocked scientists, as each mummy was composed of parts from several individuals. This sounded very strange and confusing, so experts decided to investigate how this could have happened. Research revealed many shocking details about the unusual find. The male mummy was composed of remains from 3 different people, 2 men and 1 woman. The female mummy also included fragments from 3 different bodies. Even more strangely, the bodies were initially mummified in the usual way, and the assembly of mummies from various remains took place some time later. The male mummy was assembled between 1440 and 1260 BC, and the female between 1310 and 1130 BC. For 500 years, they were stored in a peat bog, and then transferred to the location where archaeologists discovered them. This story resembles the plot of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, but who needed to create strange mummies from the remains of several people. Scientists suggest that this find demonstrates an unknown ancient ritual, symbolizing the union of several clans into one. Many of you may associate witch hunts with the Middle Ages, Indeed, during this era, tens of thousands of people were killed for being accused of witchcraft. But references to punishments for engaging in dark magic date back to ancient times. For example, the Babylonian Code of Hammurabi, dated 1752 BC, prescribed the death penalty for witchcraft. Until the 15th century, punishments for dark magic rituals were exceptionally rare. It is believed that the history of witch hunts began between 1430 and 1440. However, this practice initially met with disapproval. 50 years later, Pope Innocent VIII issued the papal bull Summis Desiderantes Affectibus. It was after the issuance of this document that more and more decrees and laws prescribing the death penalty for witchcraft began to appear. One of the most famous among them was the treatise on demonology, Malleus Maleficarum, written by the German monk Heinrich Kramer in collaboration with Inquisitor Jacob Sprenger. The first mass persecutions of witches began in 1585 and actively continued for the next 10 years. Then, until the 1630s, the number of executions significantly decreased, but later the persecutions resumed. The witch hunts were most prevalent in Germany, Switzerland, France, and Scotland. Experts estimate that at least 50,000 people were killed during the active fight against witchcraft. Most of the victims were women, but men were also accused of witchcraft. Before execution, witches were placed in special separate prisons. One such place of imprisonment was discovered in 2016 during the restoration of a 15th century church in the Scottish city of Aberdeen. According to historians, in 1597, 23 women and 1 man accused of witchcraft awaited their execution in this prison. The witch hunts only ceased in the 18th century. The last person executed for witchcraft was a Swiss woman named Anna Goldie. After enduring prolonged torture, she confessed to engaging in dark magic, and in 1782 she was sentenced to death. In 2023, a Babylonian tablet estimated to be 3,500 years old was discovered in the storage of the British Museum. It had long been of no interest, but during its re-examination, Dr. Irving Finkel noticed an unusual feature. When placed at a certain angle and illuminated, the image of 2 people becomes visible. According to Finkel, the tablet depicts a woman leading the ghost of a man into the afterlife. On the back of the tablet, there was an inscription with instructions for exorcising spirits. According to these instructions, a person whose home was haunted by a ghost needed to make figurines of a man and a woman and then dress them appropriately. The man's clothing should be everyday attire, while the woman's figurine needs to be wrapped in 4 red cloths and 1 purple cloth. The female figurine should also feature a gold brooch and contain travel accessories in her inventory. After preparing the figurines, one could proceed with the ritual, which was always performed at dawn. Irving Finkel believes that this tablet is unique because it bears the oldest depiction of a ghost among all previously found items. This artifact attests to the belief 3,500 years ago in the afterlife and spirits, and also that lost souls needed assistance to be guided into the realm of the dead. In 2009, during road construction near the English town of Weymouth, workers discovered a mass grave with beheaded remains. Analysis of the remains showed that they all belonged to healthy and physically developed men. Radiocarbon dating determined that the find dated back to between 830 and 1034 AD, a time when the Anglo-Saxons had to engage in battle with Vikings. The mass grave contained the remains of 51 beheaded individuals. Their skulls were found in the same pit but were kept separate. Almost all the remains showed signs of sword and axe wounds. Archaeologists believe the remains belonged to Vikings. It is likely that the Scandinavian warriors ventured into an Anglo-Saxon settlement, underestimated their strength, and were captured and then killed. Scientists still need to conduct anthropological research on the discovered remains, which will help accurately determine the racial identity of the deceased. In 2016, during the construction of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Cultural Center in the Faliro Bay area of Athens, 2 burial sites with 80 human remains were uncovered. Archaeologists were intrigued because most of the skeletons had iron shackles on their hands. Initially, it was believed that the remains belonged to slaves, but further research disproved this assumption. Scientists determined that the remains dated back to the 8th to 5th centuries BCE. All belonged to young men in good physical condition. This led to the speculation that the deceased were soldiers, more specifically, followers of the former Olympic champion and aristocrat Cylon, known in history due to the Cylonian affair. In 632 BCE, Cylon planned an uprising against the authority of Athens. With the help of friends and a squad of soldiers gifted by his father-in-law, he seized the Acropolis. However, the entire population of Attica rose against him, and his plan failed. Cylon and his brother managed to escape, but his soldiers sought refuge at the altars of the gods, only to be captured and killed instead. Archaeologists note that Cylon's soldiers met a harsh and painful death. On August 1, 1984, Andy Mould, a worker at a peat extraction company, discovered well-preserved human remains in the Lindomoss peat bog in Cheshire, England. A year earlier, Mould had found a skull at the same location, which was later determined to belong to a woman who died in the 1st or 2nd century AD. The newly discovered remains were sent to the laboratory of the British Nuclear Energy Research Institute. Radiocarbon dating established that the remains belonged to a man who died between 90 AD. He was about 25 years old, 168 centimeters tall, and weighed 65 kilograms. The natural mummification of the man's body allowed scientists to gather some information about his life. The man had well-developed muscles, indicating he engaged in a lot of physical labor, but certain nuances suggested his noble origin, such as neatly trimmed nails and a beard. The man was completely healthy, and his death was caused by 2 axe blows to the head. Additionally, his throat was slit and several ribs were broken. These multiple injuries led scientists to speculate that this man was murdered and offered as a sacrifice. The mummy of Lindoman is currently preserved in the British Museum in London. In the early 1940s, an Indian forester named Madhwal made a horrifying discovery. Near Lakerupkund in the Himalayas, he stumbled upon hundreds of human remains. Madhwal was shocked. The bodies looked untouched. But how could they be there when the nearest settlement was a 5-day walk away? Madhwal reported his find to the authorities, and specialists soon arrived at the scene. They estimated that there were over 600 deceased. But who these people were, what brought them there, and how they died remained a mystery. Scientists struggled for a long time to answer these questions. There were many theories explaining the mass death at Lakerupkund. Initially, it was thought that the deceased could have been Japanese soldiers or traders. However, after examining the bodies, another theory emerged. The bodies likely belonged to Indian pilgrims who were trekking a challenging Himalayan route. They all died at different times, but most in the 9th century AD. It is probable that they were caught in a severe hailstorm, a common occurrence in that area. This was indicated by the presence of fractures on the skulls of the deceased. Surprisingly, this grim story has attracted tourists, and now Lakerupkund, the skeleton lake, has become a popular spot among enthusiasts of extreme mountain treks. In 2016, during excavations near the small town of Salango, located on the southern coast of Ecuador, archaeologists discovered a burial site with the remains of 2 infants from the Guangala culture, estimated to be 2,100 years old. However, researchers were not just amazed by the age of the remains, but by the fact that the infants' heads were encased in unusual helmets made from the skulls of other children. Nothing like this had ever been encountered by archaeologists before, prompting scientists around the world to propose various theories explaining this unique ritual. The most popular theory suggests that such helmets were used as protection in the afterlife. Since the deceased were infants around 6-7 months old, they were not prepared for life after death, and the helmet from an older child might transfer acquired skills and knowledge. However, why then weren't the skulls of adults used for this purpose? Likely a helmet made from an adult's skull would have been too large. This find is truly unique, as scientists have never encountered such rituals before. Marcelin and Francine Dumoulin were an ordinary married couple raising 7 children. On August 15, 1942, they left their home in the Swiss village of Chandelin and went to the mountains to milk their cows. That day, they disappeared. The search for the spouses lasted several days, but no traces were found at that time. 75 years later, in 2017, near the alpine ski resort of Les Diablerets in the Saint-Florent Glacier at an altitude of over 2,600 meters above sea level, the remains of a man and a woman were discovered. The 2 bodies were found in a crevice of the glacier, lying next to each other along with backpacks, a bottle, a book, and a watch. Swiss police checked the database of people who went missing in the 1940s and learned about the disappearance of the Dumoulin spouses. Their youngest daughter, Monique Gauchi, who was 4 years old when her parents disappeared, was called to identify the remains. Monique immediately recognized her mother and father. She said she had always believed that one day her parents' bodies would be found, so she could bury them. The only regret she had was that her brothers and sisters did not live to see that day. In May 2015, a severe storm struck the Irish settlement of Collooney, toppling many trees, including a 215-year-old beech. When local residents tried to remove the old tree, they discovered human remains entangled in its roots, with other bones lying in the soil. Naturally, people were shocked by this discovery and called the Archaeological Service to the scene. Osteoarchaeologist Linda Lynch took charge of studying the find. Using radiocarbon dating, she managed to gather some information about the deceased. The remains belonged to a young man who died between the years 1030 and 1200 AD, aged 17-20. The presence of several deep wounds indicated that he died a violent death from stabs with a dagger or short sword. Most likely, the young man was an ordinary village resident who spent a lot of time working in the fields. However, the circumstances of his death remain unknown. During excavations in the Lombardy region of Italy, archaeologists discovered one of the most unusual skeletons. In place of an amputated arm, this person had a knife that served as a prosthesis. The study of the remains showed that they belonged to a man who died between the 6th and 8th centuries, aged 40, 50. It is, of course, impossible to determine the exact reason for his arm's loss, but experts were able to determine that the strange prosthesis had served as a limb replacement for many years. It is likely that the man decided on his own to use a knife in place of his hand. This was indicated by bone deformations that had formed after multiple attempts to fit the prosthesis. Scientists spent a long time trying to obtain information about the identity of the person to whom the remains belonged. They were, of course, interested in finding out what this person did and why he needed such a unique prosthesis. Unfortunately, they were unable to do so. Thus, the biography of the man with a knife as a hand remains unknown, as does how he managed to survive without succumbing to blood infection after the prosthesis was fitted. In the Museum of Andean Sanctuaries in Arequipa, a priceless archaeological find is preserved: the mummy of Juanita, also known as the Ice Maiden of Ambato. Her remains were discovered in 1995 on the dormant stratovolcano Ambato in Peru. The mummy is one of the best preserved of all those found. This preservation allowed scientists to learn a lot about the girl's last days. Dating showed that Juanita died between 1440 and 1480 AD at the age of about 15 years. Ethnically, the young girl belonged to the Inca civilization. Looking at this mummy, it might seem that the girl died after getting lost and freezing in the snow on the volcano's summit. However, the real cause of her death was quite different. Scientists determined that Juanita died from a blow to the head with a blunt object. A year before her death, she followed a diet, consuming corn and animal proteins. although the diet of the less wealthy Incas primarily consisted of potatoes and other vegetables. For 8 weeks before her death, the girl consumed large amounts of coca and alcohol. This information indicated that Juanita was sacrificed to the gods. It is known that the Incas practiced child sacrifice. The children had to be beautiful and healthy, and it didn't matter which family they came from. Once the victims were chosen, they were prepared over the course of a year. Initially, they were fed well, and before death, they were given large amounts of alcohol and coca. Undoubtedly, such customs seem horrific to modern people, but the Incas believed that winning the favor of the gods was only possible through various rituals, including sacrifice. The Aztecs were one of the most numerous and powerful civilizations in North America. They built a great empire with its own system of governance. Their architecture is impressive, and some monuments are even shocking. Perhaps the most frightening structure built by the Aztecs is the Tower of Skulls. It was discovered by archaeologists at the site of what was once the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan. The tower has a diameter of 6 meters and consists of 676 complete skulls and more than 1,000 small fragments. Experts believe that the tower was once part of the Great Skull Wall. This structure is mentioned in the accounts of the conquistadors. The Great Wall frightened the colonizers because it was believed to have been built from the skulls of captured victims offered in sacrifice. Historians explain that the Aztecs believed in the deity Huitzilopochtli, who fought against the forces of darkness. To sustain his strength, human sacrifices were required, so the Aztecs killed foreigners and members of other ethnic groups. However, studies of the skulls from the tower showed that the Aztecs also sacrificed women and children from their own civilization. The discovery of the Tower of Skulls has enabled scientists to learn new details about the ritual practices of the Aztecs that were previously unknown. Do you believe in vampires? Of course, most would say no, as they are characters of fantasy plots. However, a recent archaeological discovery might make you believe that these mythical bloodsuckers could have actually existed. In the vicinity of the village of Pin in Poland, researchers from Nicholas Copernicus University uncovered 2 vampire graves dating back to the 17th century. The first grave contained the remains of a child aged 7 years, while the second held a young woman. But what indicated that these graves were those of vampires? In the Middle Ages, people feared witches, vampires, and other beings associated with dark magic. At that time, there emerged a practice of burying those believed to be connected with evil forces in a particular way. In some countries, it was deemed necessary to drive a stake through the deceased's heart, place a protective coin in their mouth, and decapitate the body. In other countries, the dead were buried face down, a lock was hung on their foot, and a sickle was attached to their neck. This is exactly how the child and woman, whose graves were found near Penna, were buried. Historians speculate that these individuals might have had certain diseases that affected their appearance, leading people to consider them vampires. Certainly, the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre are the most famous landmarks of Paris, but the city also hosts another popular tourist destination, the catacombs of Paris. The catacombs of Paris can be described as a true city of the dead, as they contain the remains of nearly 6 million people. The history of this site began in the 17th century, when the population of the French capital began to rapidly increase, leading to a shortage of city cemetery space for burials. The Paris authorities were perplexed by this problem for a long time, until, at the end of the 18th century, it was decided to use the quarries located under the city as ossuaries. Bodies and human remains began to be stored in these underground catacombs. This solution helped eliminate diseases and relieve the overloaded city cemeteries. Today, the Paris catacombs are a popular tourist spot. Their total length is nearly 11 kilometers, but only a special tourist route is open for visits. In 2015, in the city of Rennes, France, archaeologists made an unusual discovery: 5 urns dating back to the 16th century. All were shaped like hearts, and inside them were not the ashes of the deceased, but their actual hearts. This remarkable find was sent to the laboratory for further study. Analysis of the hearts revealed that 3 of the 5 belonged to individuals who had suffered from cardiovascular diseases. 1 organ belonged to a healthy individual, and the 5th heart was severely damaged and could not be studied. Today, such a ritual might seem very strange, but in the Middle Ages, there was a tradition of heart burials. This custom arose during the Crusades. Crusaders often died in battles far from home. Transporting their bodies back was impractical, so relatives were sent internal organs, most often the hearts of the soldiers. This tradition later allowed for memorializing a person in more than one location. Among the well-known individuals who chose to have their hearts buried separately from their bodies were Anne Boleyn, the wife of King Henry VIII of England, Polish composer Frédéric Chopin, English writer and poet Thomas Hardy, and many other members of the European aristocracy. The residents of the Loess Plateau in Huanghe Province, China, long believed that the nearby stone structures were part of the Great Wall. However, recently, people started finding pieces of jade in this area. Jade deposits were far from this region, which meant that the jade was brought from afar, but by whom and for what purpose, if this arid region was previously considered sparsely populated? Archaeologists also became interested in this peculiar feature and began excavations, which revealed that the stone structures were not part of the Great Wall, but ruins of the ancient lost city of Simao. Simao was built about 4,300 years ago, centuries before the emergence of Chinese civilization. The city was surrounded by a stone wall and contained a stepped pyramid about 70 meters high. During the excavations, archaeologists made many amazing discoveries, including a very eerie find: 6 pits filled with 80 human skulls. Initially, scientists thought the skulls belonged to war prisoners who had been killed and beheaded for a ritual. Further investigation, however, showed that they all belonged to young women. Above the sacrificial pits, monuments were erected with patterns resembling eyes, adorned with jade stones. All these features led scientists to speculate that this site was used by an ancient civilization for sacrificial rituals, where the victims were exclusively young women. Historians claim that the scale of such ritual violence was unprecedented for the era of the emergence of Chinese civilization. Many of you would agree that the mummy in this photograph looks very eerie. The face of the deceased is frozen in pain and fear, which they must have experienced before death. This mummy was found quite by chance by an American traveler. He reported his discovery to archaeologists. Scientists established that the mummy belonged to a man aged 35, 40, who died 2,500 years ago. Since this find was made quite recently, experts have not yet been able to determine the cause of this man's death. However, it is likely that his death was very agonizing. It is worth noting that this is not the first screaming mummy found. The most famous among them was discovered in 1886. It belonged to Pentower, the son of Rameses III. The fate of Pentower's mummy is now known to historians, and I believe that soon we will also learn about the details of the death of the man to whom the recently found mummy belongs. That's all from me. If you liked this video, don't forget to rate it, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell. Your engagement is the best reward for me. Thank you for watching. See you soon. Bye.